Hi, and welcome to another video. In the previous part, we built a graphical user interface in EEZ Studio, and we left off with a bunch of generated code files, but I mentioned that we needed to take some additional steps before we can actually use them on the Arduino, and that's what this video will be about. And without further ado, let's just jump right into it.
So what I've done is I prepared this GitHub repository here for everyone who is interested, and what it contains is this README file with step-by-step instructions on what you need to do, and it also contains the necessary folder structure already set up with the configuration files for the RP2040 and my particular user setup file for this display and my Arduino that I'm using. If you don't know how to configure this, I went over the entire process in great detail in the older Squareline videos. So if you don't know what these files do, I highly recommend that you actually take a look at the video and watch through at least through, I think it's the third part where I export it, and then this should all become really clear to you. For everyone else who has already used LVGL and TFT-eSpy, this should be nothing new. So what you can do is once you download this, you just click on code and get the zip file here. You end up with a zip file here that looks like this. It's the starter project, and what you do is you copy all of this over here, and it gives you these README files. Let's just kind of get rid of these. The first thing you do is you open up the UI file, and I think this should already be set to the correct path anyway, but what you need to do is you go to the Arduino IDE settings, and here, you just set the sketchbook location to the root folder. That's important, the root folder of this project. So that is this folder that contains the subdirectories. Then if you just follow the list there, you can see that you then need to install LVGL and TFT-eSpy. So what you do is you go to the Arduino library manager, you just look for LVGL. That's the first thing you need to install. And here it's crucial that you pick the correct version or something above that, but not like a major version jump, like from 8 to 9. But it's best if you just kind of choose this one, because otherwise you might need to change the generated code. So we just install this library. Good, that's done. And what else you need to do is TFT-eSpy. I mean, feel free to use something else, but I found that TFT-eSpy works just fine. And this is required because you need something that interfaces with the screen. And talking about interfacing with the screen, I also need the Adafruit touchscreen library for my display, and here the version doesn't really matter, so I'm just going to pick the newest one. And on the topic of versions, I found that if I use the RP2040 Connect here, that is one of the Mbed OS boards, I found that the newer versions, so I think it started with 4, so everything above 4.0.2 caused my board to crash whenever I uploaded the code, right? So I mean, I don't know, which libraries are incompatible here, but some of them seem to crash newer versions of the Mbed OS. Yeah, for this particular instance, I just switched back to 3.0, and if we just look at the folder now, yep, there we go, it should have these in here, which is perfect, and the TFT-eSpy should have the user conf or the user setup. What you need to do is you need to replace it with your correct user setup, but like I mentioned, this is something that you need to do yourself. It's nothing that I can universally provide. All this file contains is just telling TFT-eSpy what display you use, which driver, and which pins connect to the Arduino here. So again, just have a look at the older video if you don't know what this is. It should be open here, so let me just paste this in here, save it. Finally, before you can compile your project, you have to copy these generated files from EEZ Studio. This is just the folder where you created your project. It creates these files for you. You just put them within the libraries, in the subfolder UI. You just put all of this in here, okay? And then you can add this line, or if you use the template, it's already here. It just includes the main header file and also these other helper libraries like LVGL, the display driver, and the touchscreen driver. But if you hit compile now, you should see that you get a bunch of these cannot include LVGL/LVGLH. And to resolve this, you need to open all of these header files generated by EEZ Studio, and you just remove the first LVGL. So the correct include statement just looks like this: include lvgl.h. Just do this for all the header files that have the import. This is a little tedious, but it's not difficult to do, and this one doesn't even have it. This is just the variables thing, and we will look at the code in a second. And now you should get another error that some files or some methods are not implemented, but otherwise it should be fine at this point. In the meantime, let me just go over this real quick. This is the template file that you can download from GitHub, and if you've watched the Squareline video, this might look very familiar to you. What this essentially is if you've installed LVGL, it comes in the examples, and it is within LVGL here, and here you go, LVGL Arduino, and this is essentially the same script. So as you can see, you will just find most of this in here again. So this is just a custom display flash function that makes use of TFT spy. This is just the default thing. The touchpad read here is a little modified because the display is rotated, so you need to, or I need to translate these values a bit. This is like not a smart way of doing it, but it works, so I just left it like this. And the setup is again pretty much the same as here, minus these serial print line commands. The rotation is different, but the rest of it is the same. All you do is you just initialize the display driver, and then just tell tell LVGL to use this custom display function that's up here. And the same for the touchscreen. So instead of using whatever is built in, we just use the custom touchscreen, which is necessary for the Adafruit touchscreen that I'm using. And finally, that's pretty much it. This just has like this handler loop. And again, I go over this in much more detail in the older Squareline videos, so I just recommend you watch those if you don't know how LVGL works. There is just two things that you need to add. Again, the imports, you just import LVGL, you import the library, but I think that's in the example script as well. And you add this UI.h, which is the main definition file for the UI that was generated by EEZ Studio. And within your setup, at the very last line of that, you initialize the EEZ Studio UI, which is just by calling UI_init. And in the loop, you add UI_tick, which will update the UI. And you can find these, yeah, exactly, this is exactly the error, but we will go over these generated files now. You can see that these are defined in the main header file of the UI, so UI_init, UI_tick. You can also look at the implementation here. So the UI_c, it just contains some helper functions like loading the screen that you want to display, and just general helpers. I don't want to go into too much detail here because it's really not necessary. The screens H and screen C, these contain the actual elements that you added to your UI. You can kind of look at it here. This is what builds, for example, the main screen, and here it generates, you should be able to actually find the back button if you look at it. There you go. And this is why it's so important to give them proper names, so you can actually find all of these things. If we just look at the back button, for example, we can see here that it adds an event somewhere. This is the action that we defined, and what the generated code does is whenever you have this, so this is just for any event, right? But it filters in here. If you trigger this pressed event on the button, it calls the custom action that we defined in EEZ Studio here. So if you again just kind of real quick, it's this one here, right? Switch to main, just calls this action, and it does that for all the elements that you actually assigned something to. Images and fonts, that's not relevant now because we don't have that, we don't use it in this particular UI. Same with styles, it's not really relevant to you. But what you need to do is, if you can see here, it generates H, so header and source files for all of these, but it doesn't do that for the actions and for the variables. And what you actually need to do here is, as you can see, these are external functions, and if we go back to the Arduino IDE, it tells you that there is an undefined reference to these functions, right? Because it doesn't know, EEZ Studio doesn't know what you actually want to do in an action. So what you need to do is you need to define this here. So I just create a new actions.c, an implementation. We just put this in here and import actions.h, and we do the same thing for the variables. So just save variables or vars.c include vars.h. And again, you just copy these definitions, and you then have to implement these functions. But for a second, let me just leave these empty. So this is a void, and this is just a boolean. And here we do the same thing. We just implement empty functions. Just for a second, I will go over that in more detail. This is, like I said, these are the actions that we defined in EEZ Studio, and this is what the code will call on certain events that you linked. And now it should just compile, and then you should be able to upload it. But there is still a problem. I was missing this standard bool import, which is funny that it doesn't add it, but okay, there you go, it compiles.
All right, so I'm here on my phone now, so I'm just gonna upload.
Yeah, so there you go. This is the uploaded UI, and if you just click around, nothing should happen at this point. But you see, if you use a pen, I should click down harder. Yeah, nothing's going on because we still need to implement the actual functions, the actions. So let's get back to the computer here, and let me show you how to at least switch around here. And I mean, obviously we're gonna do everything.
We at least know that everything works as intended, and we can upload the code. And now let's get to implementing the actions here. If we have a look at this action switch to settings, we remember, because we used meaningful names, that this is what happens when you click the settings button on the main screen. And there is a function that's called load screen here, and that is all that you need to call, right? It is something that was generated by EEZ Studio. So what you go in here, what you do in here, you just include the UI.h so that you have access to the function. And I already forgot what it was called. It was called load screen. So we load screen, and here you need, it is in screens.h, so in the header file, and you can see that it assigns the main screen ID of 1 and the settings screen ID of 2. So what we say here is, when users click the settings button, we load screen settings ID, screen ID, and similarly we load screen, we switch to main, which is screen ID main. And one thing that I don't like about this is that they use this animated version. So I'm just going to remove the anim thing, and also going to remove this because I don't want the animation to play. It's just, I kind of don't like it. It doesn't look good. Yeah, but if you then go back to the Arduino IDE and you hit upload again,
it refreshed the UI, and if you hit settings, now it goes to the settings screen. If you hit back, it goes back. And it's really great user experience that I just place these on top of each other, so you can accidentally click one, but it doesn't really matter for this example. What matters is that this works, and you can actually also toggle this, but it's not gonna have any effect. Right, this is because it's linked to the variable too, so we need to take care of that. But we'll do that in a second. And also the increment action doesn't do anything here. So let's get back to the computer and implement the rest.
Like I said, we need to implement the final actions here. All right, I also have this deactivate change thing. You know, you may or may not implement it. I actually just added it as a little extra example, so I'm just going to leave this empty for now. But if you remember, we have this variable and we linked it to the actual toggle button. So what I need to do here is I need to create a boolean, which I'm just going to call inactive. I'm going to set this to, I think the default was true, but it doesn't really matter because it should set it anyway. What EEZ Studio does is, for each variable that you define, you get a getter and a setter method that you need to implement here. Right, so if you get the variable value, all this should do is return the user-defined variable, which is inactive. And if you set the variable, you can run custom logic in here, but in this simple case, we just set inactive to the new value. But what else we need to do is, yeah, you know what I actually forgot to do is add an event for the increment button, but that doesn't really matter all that much because, we can do it manually. So let me go to screens. And on the main, so if you just look for the main screen, we should see create screen main, create screen main. And in here, you can see that it adds all these elements, and we should find the increment button somewhere as well. So we have the main screen, the label panel, and here we have the increment button. And here we have an event handler, and this one doesn't do anything, so we can just kind of copy from down here. So here we actually want to do, or it doesn't even have to be that complicated. We need a new variable anyway, so I'm just going to call this int counter and we set it to 0. So we just do the same thing as before, get var counter. We just return counter, and similarly void set var counter. I mean, I don't like this snake case, but I'm just going to keep it consistent, which is int value. So we just set, so actually we don't even need that really, we just call it increment, and then we don't even need this. We just do counter plus equals 1. And that's the cool thing about that. You can pretty much, you know, if you don't use the flow, you are much more flexible. But then again, even if you use flow, you can just really add these functions whenever you want. Again, it's a mistake, but it gives us a good chance to have a look at the inner workings of the generated code. Right now, I forgot what I wanted to do. Let me just go back here. So this is the main settings button, main increment button. So what we do here is we just increment, and that's it, because it has the variables h. The variables h contains the definitions, and the variable c contains the implementations, which is just a simple thing here. So that should already work as well. And how you can, you know, all of this is nice and everything, but we still don't have it in the Arduino program, right? So what we need to do here is you have to include the variables here. So this is just vars.h in the Arduino program. And what you can do then is here, for example, actually read out the variable value, serial.begin 9600, scroll down, serial.debug, isn't it? No, it's print line. What am I talking about? Get, that doesn't give you what it actually does. It's get var counter, and we just print that to the console. And upon uploading this, undefined reference, okay, maybe I have it wrong. Okay, I think I found the problem here. For whatever reason, this I think it might be due to or down to me using like an older version here. Let's actually check this version. What is that? Okay, so it's 0.12. What this here is missing is it doesn't find, because it doesn't use it's missing this definition. So if you're using C++, right, extern C, because it's just C code, not C++, so it cannot link it. I think this is the problem here. And I mean, this really sucks that it doesn't work out of the box, but I feel like if you actually use like the newer version, this should just work out of the box, because yeah, that was what I was missing. Yeah, so the newest version is 0.14.2. Lesson learned, use the newest version here and you won't run into problems. But if you run into this problem that it cannot find functions that you add, make sure to include these lines that tell it that if you're using C++, then add this piece of code here. Regardless, this now works. Now let's see whether we can finally upload this. But yeah, it's actually, you know, it's not even a bad thing that this happened, because really, at least if any of you would be running into this problem now, you would at least know what the cause is and how to resolve it, most likely. But anyway, as you saw, you can just add your own variables to that file, no problems. Or I mean, at least you should be. So it's now done uploading. Let me switch back to my phone.
All right, so let's open the serial monitor. It gives you 0. And let me go over here. If I increment this,
Oh yeah, oh of course, yeah, it's disabled. So let's go back. Now it's actually enabled because we provided those getter setter functions for the variable. So if I now click this, it should technically increment the button value, but it doesn't. Might have just forgotten. Let me have a look at it again.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And during the debugging, I actually replaced the files here. And what we do is, again, we just copy this because I reset it during debugging. And here we already have the variable's age. So what we need to do is set variable count. We do get variable count +1, semicolon, and then we do upload. Even though this now didn't work, you already saw that the linked variable that we actually linked down here, right, the button inactive variable, that already works without writing any logic code. All you need to do is just provide the implementation for the for these getter and setter functions here. So once this finally works, right, after all of these steps of like debugging and everything, troubleshooting, the last thing that we need to do is actually just update the label, and I will show you that in a second. Like, go back to the serial plotter. You can see it's 0 here.
This is disabled by default, right? We go to settings, we click this. This is a little finicky, but it's just because of the touch screen really that I'm using. And now I should be able to increment this. Yeah, and it jumps up. But anyway, we can see it here in the console that it increments whenever I push this button. It increments the counter. Last thing that remains is to make it display here instead of text.
Alright, so this should be fairly easy to accomplish. We can see this is the object, the counter title, actually this one, the counter value label, and it is stored in the object as a pointer. And all you need to do is, this is how it sets a text, right? You can just do that yourself. Label set text. There's a format option, FMT. You can also find that here in the documentation. So, and they even give you this example. So here you do the object that you want to change, and here you do the format string, which is decimal. Actually, it's an integer. I think it's just I. And here you do this count, which I store in a variable, but you can directly kind of just get it from the function too if you want to. So just get rid of that, and
this might already just display 0, yes. This is disabled by default, so you go to settings, you do this. Anyway, let's increment this, and you can see that setting this value here from within the Arduino code also works. So I think here we implemented the most common tasks that most users would like to perform here. Like, switching between screens. That is just done in EEZ Studio. No, actually it's not. It's done in Arduino, right? So it's like from the Arduino code we can switch screens. From EEZ Studio we can assign variable values like that, and this disables this. This is just done automatically. And similarly, incrementing here increments a custom variable in the Arduino code, and that then sends it back and changes the label value. So I think those are the main workflows that we also discussed in the Squareline Studio video. Yeah, that's what it was called. So yeah, I mean that's the entire process.
To summarize is, you create a new project here with in this case without flow. You can choose the flow too. Make sure you use the newest version of EEZ Studio. That's what we learned today. You can add screens. The first thing you do is you change these to the actual display size. Then you change these, the pages, and then you add elements. You can style them using CSS, like Flexbox and stuff. When you're done, you can verify and then export. The exported files, these ones, they go, you can either set it up manually, like you create a libraries folder, you put the UI subfolder within, and this is where these files go. Don't forget your lvconf and tfte-spy configurations, which, if you don't know how these work, you can find that in the previous video. You install the necessary libraries, from within Arduino Studio. In the created sketch, for the sketch, you just have to verify that you actually set the location to the root folder of your project so that it finds these imports. Again, if you don't want to set up all of that, what you can do is you can find this EEZ Arduino starter on my GitHub. I will link it in the video description. It also gives you these steps. The next thing you do is you replace in all the affected header files, you just replace the import from lvgl/lvglh, so it only says this. You then create the variables and actions C files and implement the functions within. Don't forget, if you're using an old version on vars h, double check that it contains these little snippets of code. You can also add your custom variables, functions, but you can also go back and recreate the code like I did. Of course, in the Arduino IDE, in your main Eno project file, you need to define the custom display function, the custom touchpad function, and within the setup, you register those two. Again, this is, you can either get it from like the examples or from the Squareline Studio video. And finally, you initialize the EEZ Studio UI, and then you call the EEZ Studio UI update function from within the loop. And this is where you can also access elements created by EEZ Studio. That's why they need proper names. I hope you found this video helpful. I mean, I had a pretty hard time setting all of this up and figuring it out, so I hope it can save you some stress and some time. I think it took me like a couple of hours to figure it out, but eventually we got there. Have fun with your own projects. Feel free to share your projects with us in the comments or on my blog, which is also linked in the video description. And yeah, have fun building your UIs, and thanks for watching.